Hello, everybody, and welcome to this HaRamadan live special. I'm Secular Spirits, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Veedu. How's it going?
It's going very well, thank you, Secular. And hello, everyone. How's it going? It's your boy Voodoo Vids in the house. Been a very, very long time, and I'm absolutely honored to be on Secular Spirits channel. It's a growing channel, and he's doing a fantastic job. So this will be exciting stream.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. And just for anyone tuning in and you're not quite sure what this is, so this is a 2-hour live event that's hosted by Ex-Muslims International. So that's a collective of ex-Muslims from across the world, including me and Veedu and many others that are going to be joining us very soon over the next 2 hours. And yeah, so this event is also celebrating International Atheist Day, which is tomorrow. And also, we wanted to just do this during the last and holiest week of Ramadan. And so, yeah, we're all a bunch of activists, organizers. A few of us are health and mental health professionals, authors, organizers, and we just wanted to have this space so that we can, share the experiences, challenges, and perspectives of ex-Muslims, and give a voice for those who maybe can't speak on the subject for safety reasons or for whatever reason. So this is a space for that, and we've got a couple of very interesting topics that we're going to have guests speaking about again over the next 2 hours. So looking forward to hearing from everyone there. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you, Vidu, and this is something I realized that we've actually never discussed. Why did you leave Islam and become an atheist?
Well, I think one of the reasons why I left Islam actually was I was really big on the whole science is connected to religion kind of thing. If you remember,
Mm,
like Zakir Naik and all those guys, and were very very influential. And I think maybe not now, but back in the days, there was this thing that Islam and science are like the same thing, and they're all interconnected. And the more research I did about science, I realized actually it's not true. And a lot of the claims that people make regarding science and religion, the interpretation one must do is very sort of, it's like gymnastics. For you to fit science into religion, you have to really look at these things in a very liberal way and not very really honest to the text itself. And I ended up I was arguing more with Muslims about science and religion than I was with atheists, until one of my friends just said to me, who's Muslim, he's like, "Bro, you just think like an atheist," and that to me felt like a dagger in the heart. Because I'm like, I'm nothing. I'm far from. He said, "You think like Dawkins." I'm like, Dawkins, that idiot. And obviously, let's get forward now. He's like, obviously, one of my heroes. But when he compared me to Dawkins, I was like, if this is how my fellow Muslims see me, then maybe there isn't space for someone like me in Islam who is thinking rationally and does value science. And I think that was like the first kind of like step. And I realized, like, what am I doing here? I'm trying to justify a project that really doesn't exist in Islam. And it was much more coherent for me just to say, you know what, I'm no longer this thing. So
mm.
that's my whole sort of 24 years. I think I left Islam at 23, 24. And the more research I did, the less convinced I was.
I suppose it was similar to me in a lot of ways. My focus on the scientific, evidence for it wasn't as big. I left Islam a bit younger than you. I was
Oh, so you beat
18.
me. Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
beat you.
Oh, you
The
beat me.
the the,
Okay.
the
All
game of
right.
life. Yeah, no, not as a competition.
No, let's go.
But
No one's keeping count, but you did beat me. Okay, fair enough.
for me, it didn't even matter that that there were a lot of things that perhaps were scientifically inaccurate in the Quran, because I didn't think about it that way, because to me my assumption was everything comes from Allah, so that's inarguable, and I wasn't aware of the sorts of claims that, well, Islam doesn't quite square with
Yeah.
modern scientific understanding of the world, or questions like, why aren't dinosaurs mentioned in the Quran? I know that those things are discussed in
Yeah.
Muslim circles, but I wasn't aware of them. For me, the big thing was when I made a really huge move in my life as a teenager, moving from the Middle East. I grew up in Dubai, in the
Mm.
United Arab Emirates. I moved to Canada alone. I had just turned 17. I think that just upended everything, because I also did not want to go,
Right.
but I had to for university, for my parents. I was resentful of them at the time, but not anymore. It was the best thing for me.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it made me question everything. Like, why am I here? And I was alone, separated from family. And that led me to just target Islam as well, because I started thinking, why do I believe this thing? And it really was just a series of questions to myself that made me realize I have no good reasons to believe. Because if you really think about it, it's quite astounding what Islam is claiming.
Absolutely.
There's as someone described it, an invisible sky daddy who's watching your every single move, but you can't see him, you can't hear him, you can't experience him. There's jinn and the devil, shaitan, all around you as well. There's malaika, angels watching you all the time, but you can't see them.
Yep.
And if you just take away the bias of belief, it starts becoming clear how more and more, I mean, it seems harsh to use the word ludicrous, but it would be ludicrous if it wasn't for the fact that there's billions of people that
Yes.
believe in it. And then when you factor in, paradise, Jannah, and hell, which we're supposedly going to go to, us, me and you and me, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're destined for
Yeah.
the hellfire.
No spoiler alert there. We know exactly what's
Yeah.
coming. Yeah.
So it just didn't make sense to me, and that's why it just kind of faded away. Yeah.
But it's quite interesting that with your story, as soon as you left the Islamic bubble, everything was now up for question. And I think this kind of stream, many people watching this will be maybe in an Islamic household or an Islamic country, and they can't leave or they can't experience what we
No.
experience, for example, in Oslo and other conferences where we get together. It's quite a rare thing, to be honest with you, which is why this stream is so important for people out there who maybe this is their tiny little door into sanity. They feel, oh my God, I can finally just release and be with people like me. So it's
I
really
think
important.
that's what matters most. Speaking from my experience, having a safe space, and not even just a safe space, but just a separation from others to be able to think for myself. And for some people, they do end up reaffirming their belief in Islam for their reasons, which I actually wouldn't be completely opposed to, because at least it's more of their own decision and not just, well, my family expects this from me, or my family's been telling me that this is what I should worship my whole life. So at least it's more of a decision that you're taking for yourself. So if anything, I think that's at least a step in the right direction from just being socially indoctrinated. But yeah, so I don't want to take up too much time with our intro, because I think we could keep talking about this more and more. We want to hear from our various guests. Before we get started with our first topic, which you can see scrolling down here, is the holy month of Hangry Games healthy, with special videos from Ali Rizvi. He couldn't make it live, but he was kind enough to send us a couple pre-recorded videos. So I just wanted to tell everyone, let's see if I can pull it out here. You can also tune in to this live stream at the website of XMNA, Ex-Muslims of North America. The URL is on the screen, but you can also just click it in the video description below if you're watching us live. So there's going to be different people commenting there, so you can engage with people in the live chat here or on the XMNA website. And I also wanted to just mention that there is a poll question in the live chat. So this is something I asked during one of my Ramadan call-ins earlier this month. So the question was, is Ramadan a positive force in the world? So you can vote yes, no, or maybe. It depends. So we'll leave it up to you to decide how you want to vote on that, and I'll check in periodically to see how that poll question is. How would you vote for that question?
I would say, okay, on the surface, some people might say, yeah, it's great to get for people to get together and so on and so forth. But I would probably say no, because a lot of the things that you could argue maybe are good in Ramadan, you could do in general anyway. And I think, and I don't want to take away anyone's thunder, so I'll leave this to others. I know this will come up in other discussions later on as well. But I think the increased sense of religiosity to be crammed into 1 month, it's a lot. It's even if you were a Muslim, a believing Muslim, it was a lot. I remember in school, in sixth form, there's one guy who would chat into the girls, and he's a playboy, and he's all this kind of stuff. But when Ramadan came around, he's like, "Sorry, sister, I can't speak to you." Sorry, she's like, "You were just hanging out with me the other night, and now you're pretending like I don't exist." And then all of these rude boys become Molanas overnight. And I think that kind of sort of schizophrenia that you experience in Ramadan, it's not healthy. And then straight after on Eid, it's just everything's open again. Of course, not all
Back to
Muslims do that.
business. Yeah.
Back to business, yeah, business as usual, exactly. So I think that kind of, and also whatever fasting you were doing, it's complete. You know, you completely negated that by going back to your old ways of eating and that kind of stuff. So I think it's not sustainable. I don't think so. In reality,
I would have to agree. Yeah,
yeah,
I'd
in
have to agree
reality,
with that. But yeah, we're going to get into that with
yeah,
some of the topics we're going to go
exactly.
over the next 2 hours. So, all right, I think we're ready to just share Ali Rizvi's clips. So there's 2 of them. I'm going to pull up the first one. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Rizvi. I am a physician and a pathologist, and I'll be talking today, sharing some thoughts on the scientific and medical differences between intermittent fasting and dry fasting. So dry fasting is like what's practiced during Ramadan, dry because you're not drinking water in addition to not having any food. So we'll be talking about this particularly from a health perspective, and I will add in a special focus, especially when it comes to children. So let's start with the basics. What is intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting, or well, let's call it IF, it's a pretty broad term. It typically refers to patterns where people limit when they eat, right? So they don't necessarily limit what they eat, but just when they eat. So the most common form of this is times restricted eating. So that means like, you eat all your meals within an 8-hour window, and then for the rest of the 16 hours, you fast. So between 12 and 8, say you eat, and then the rest of the time you fast. Sometimes the window can be 6 hours, or it can be variable. But during that fasting period, you can still drink water or tea or coffee or things that like liquids that don't carry any calories. So in contrast, dry fasting, like what's done during Ramadan, that involves no food and no water from dawn all the way to sunset. So depending on the time of the year, the location, that can mean from 14 to 18 hours or even more without any hydration. And then often the entire pattern is inverted. So that means that meals are consumed late at night or really early in the morning, which can cause some issues with our natural circadian rhythms. So from a medical standpoint, intermittent fasting has a large and just constantly growing. There's a lot of research happening here. So there's a growing body of evidence that supports it. So it's been shown to improve insulin sensitivity. That means that your body's more sensitive to your insulin, and you just need a little bit of insulin to move glucose out of your blood and into your tissues. It also reduces inflammation, right? It lowers triglycerides, which is a certain kind of fat in your body, and it also promotes fat metabolism. And then there are some studies that also show improvements in something from your brain called neurotrophic factor. And this is something that helps you with cognition and neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain cells, your neurons, to form new connections. And so it keeps your, you can learn, create new habits and things like that. They're just more agile mentally. So because you're still hydrating, you're still taking liquids during intermittent fasting, the body doesn't really enter a state of stress or dehydration. Right. So it's easier to maintain your kidney function. That's very important for kidney function, actually. Balance of your electrolytes and also mental clarity. And then there's something called autophagy. I won't get into this too much. It's basically a process where the cells of your body can clean out their damaged components. So it's kind of like a cleansing of the cells. But that's also activated during these fasting windows. And this can contribute to long-term health and even longevity. It can help you live longer. It's been shown to increase lifespan. So with dry fasting, so let's go to like what we do in Ramadan, which is dry fasting. Some of these benefits do occur, right? But there is an added physiological stress due to dehydration, and that makes all the difference, the fact that you're not taking any liquid. So there are many studies that have shown that even a little bit of dehydration, right, can reduce your cognitive function. It can increase your fatigue and stress out your kidneys and your cardiovascular system. So, excuse me, there's also there's a higher chance of electrolyte imbalances, and that especially goes for if you're living in hot climates or if you are physically active and exercise a lot.
I just wanted to pause here to just like mention one thing. We were talking about this a little bit off the air a couple of days ago, but the fact that, you know, as it's called, dry fasting is something that was introduced into Islam from people who live in, you know, modern day Saudi Arabia is kind of mind blowing to me. And speaking as someone who, you know, grew up in Dubai, very, very hot in the summers. When I was living there, Ramadan was thankfully not during the middle of the summer. It was more early winter, fall. So it still gets pretty hot there. And just speaking anecdotally, it was excruciating to do anything while not drinking water. I think that was really the killer for me.
Yeah, I just on that, we had, I think in the 2010s, I think it was, Ramadan was like bang in the middle of our summer in England, and I have hay fever as well. So taking any, I had to wake up 4 in the morning to take the hay fever pills, and I had exams during that time. So I'm not blaming my exam results on, you know, Ramadan, but you know, I would say, you know, not that my parents would accept that, but I'm just saying it was just terrible. Like, I think what Ali is saying here is correct. Restraining from food is one thing, but restraining from liquids is just another level, and it's just, I just don't see any benefit in that, personally speaking.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's let Ali finish explaining the negatives.
So that can really kind of take a toll on you, the electrolyte imbalances. Another concern is that during Ramadan, there's a shift in your sleep and eating schedules, right? So that we mentioned earlier can lead to disruption in your circadian rhythms and your circadian cycles, which can counteract some of the metabolic benefits of fasting. So, you know, if you do have metabolic benefits, we all hear about how important sleep is and regular sleep cycles are. That can really do a number on you in terms of your metabolism and the metabolic benefits that fasting gives you. So, and because in Ramadan, people do tend to eat large meals, and often they're very carbohydrate rich meals, and they happen really at night, the quality of your nutrition can sometimes decline as well. So one thing that's really important here that I think it's on a lot of people's minds is, what about the children? And this is where things become very, very different, right? So let's talk about the impact on children. And again, I think this is a very important issue. So medically speaking, children should not be fasting for prolonged periods, right? Especially during dry fasting during Ramadan. So their bodies are in a state of active growth and development all the time. They have higher fluid requirements per their body weight compared to adults. And then so even short-term dehydration in children can lead to everything from headaches and irritability, dizziness, and most importantly, impaired concentration and impaired learning, right? So this usually happens during the time that they're in school. So this can really have an impact. So, and then more importantly than that, fasting in children has not been shown to offer any physiological benefit. And instead, it's been shown to actually cause harm. It can disrupt growth, disrupt metabolism. It can disrupt mental functioning. So unlike adults, children don't have the metabolic reserves to tolerate long fasting windows, right? Especially without water. So from a purely medical standpoint, there's zero health reason to encourage dry fasting in children. And in fact, there's actually a potential for harm. So even if they say they feel fine, there are many kids, you know, because of the pressure around them, they will push themselves. They just want to participate. You know, they want to take part in it, but their physiology simply isn't built for it.
Thank you so much for that, Ali. We do have a second clip that we'll get to shortly as well. But yeah, to his very last point, it really is the case that for me, I wanted to start fasting as soon as possible because you know it's just it's a sign that you're mature, that you're a grown up. In the same kind of way that I think women or little girls, I should say, start wearing the hijab like at a very, very young age, before hitting puberty, because they see that's what the grown-ups are doing. That's
Yeah.
what kids are all about. I remember that myself, that I wanted to do it as soon as possible, and I had this deep inner pride when I started doing it. And yeah, it really resonated with me of how it can really negatively impact kids when
Mm.
probably parents and families think, wow, look at our
Yeah.
kids, they're being so mature, when it's actually harming them.
It's actually, you're right, because I started fasting when I was 7 or 8, but luckily back then in England, because it's so grey and miserable, the fasting period was like not even that long. But for me, it was super exciting. Oh my god, I'm fasting! I'm doing what the adults do. And to this day, my grandma says, "Well, you used to fast when you were a kid, and now you don't even fast anymore. You should be ashamed of yourself." But one thing that Ali did mention that was actually really really important, is the sleep. Like, say what you want about food and water, but this disrupting your sleep and people end up sleeping during the day anyway, because they're like, I haven't caught up on my hours. And if you got work and you're traveling, it is so hard to function. Just forget the food and water, just the sleep in and of itself. And like, if you had to create a month where your body would be in good shape, it would not be no water, big meals, and then disrupt your sleep pattern. you know. And I'm giving the analogy here, like I know a lot of Muslims over there, like MMA or Khabib or whatever it is, like they wouldn't do this kind of stuff. It wouldn't be ideal for them to miss out on such or on their prime time sleep, dehydrate themselves, and only eat like one massive deal, which is mostly carbs, just before the night. So it's not an ideal diet or an ideal lifestyle for a month.
No, very, very well said. And okay, we have a second clip from Ali. I'm just going to add that here.
Yes, intermittent fasting. Hi again. So let's start by acknowledging something again. Yes, intermittent fasting with proper hydration has been widely studied. The health benefits are real. They're well documented. A lot of evidence for it. And as I mentioned before, intermittent fasting has been shown to improve insulin sensitivity, reduce systemic inflammation, enhance fat metabolism, regulate blood pressure, and then even sort of like increase the impression. Well, we talked about autophagy, so it can increase the expression of autophagy, which is the body's ability to cleanse its cells, the damaged parts of cells, and also a stress resistance genes. So it can also regulate some enzyme and enzymatic and hormonal pathways that play a big role in longevity and lifespan. Some of these include insulin growth factor 1. There's AMPK. There's another sort of enzyme called mTOR, but I mean the enzymatic system called mTOR. But we're not gonna geek out here too much. So let's get back to basics. So these are all basically, they're all.
I just like how Ali caught himself there. Okay, I'm going a little bit too deep into the weeds.
Absolutely.
Key factors when it comes to aging, and intermittent fasting can help these work in your favor, right? So you age slower. But the key thing here is this. So most of these benefits, they come from energy restriction, metabolic switching, which means our ability to shift between different sources of fuel for energy, like glucose or fat, and these benefits come from hydration supported fasting. So that's fasting where you're also having liquid. So they don't come from dehydration. Now, when it comes to dry Ramadan style fasting, the picture isn't as clear, and in many ways, it's still sort of like a dark void, when it comes to the evidence and the science in dry fasting. And so, and the reason for this is there's just not a whole lot of high quality studies that study dry fasting in an isolated way. Most of them look at fasting overall. So, when we're talking about fasting without water, right, there's not a lot of studies that actually examine its long-term health impacts in a sort of a rigorous, scientific, controlled way. So most of what we have comes from studies that are conducted during Ramadan. And while some of those do show temporary improvements in lipid profiles or glucose control, the results are inconsistent, they're short-lived, and importantly, they're not unique to dry fasting, right? So What's important to understand here is that the mechanisms behind dry fasting are different, right? Or at least they're less well understood. So you might hear people say that dehydration itself may stimulate deeper levels of, autophagy or the body's ability to adapt to metabolic stress and so on. But again, this is just all speculation. They're speculative hypotheses. There's no actual outcomes that have been consistently demonstrated in human beings. And there's no evidence right now at all that dry fasting activates any kind of unique health promoting pathway, right? That goes beyond what intermittent fasting has already demonstrated with the support of hydration and liquid intake. So when we talk about long-term health, the reality is that we really just simply, we don't know what the repeated cycles of dehydration do to the body over months or years, and over time, especially in people with kidney disease or cardiovascular conditions that may not even be diagnosed yet, or in people with electrolyte imbalances. So unlike intermittent fasting, which has been incorporated into sort of long-term health interventions and even studies looking at reducing the risk of cancer and other diseases, dry fasting just hasn't been tested in any structured long-term or preventive health setting. And the places where it has been studied hasn't really shown any unique benefits. So from a medical perspective, we don't have the data to say that it improves long-term health. And we do have plausible reasons to be cautious. And once again, okay, so let's talk about children again, right? So coming to children, I think this is an important point of focus. The concerns are even stronger. So as I mentioned before, kids are not just sort of little adults, right? They have a higher metabolic rate, right? They're growing and developing constantly at a great rate. They have greater water needs, and they don't really have the capacity to tolerate, their bodies don't have the capacity to tolerate prolonged fasting, especially without water, right? So when you have repeated cycles of daytime dehydration, that can impair not only their cognition and their concentration and all of that stuff in the short term, but potentially it can also affect their thermal regulation, which is the ability to maintain a consistent internal body temperature, the development of their kidneys, absorption of nutrients, right, in the food. So they can have long-term impacts on this. So there's no scientific reason at the moment to expect dry fasting to offer any health benefits for children. It's just simply not a physiologically appropriate practice for bodies that are growing and developing, and medical organizations generally advise against it. So finally, from a medical standpoint, compared to intermittent fasting, dry fasting carries more risk, less proven benefit, especially for vulnerable groups like children, and it should not be considered a substitute or an alternative to evidence-based intermittent fasting that has scientific support for its benefits.
Thank you so much, Ali. On just behalf of everyone, really appreciate you sending all this information, and I think it's actually good that it's very detailed, because there's a lot of pseudoscience around this, and there's a lot of Muslims, ever since I was a Muslim as a kid, saying, "Oh, it's very healthy for you. You lose weight." I can anecdotally say that I never lost weight during Ramadan. As Noor in the live chat says, gaining weight during Ramadan makes sense because the body goes in starvation mode and hangs onto food and doesn't digest it. So why is it such a surprise? And I think that makes sense to me, even though I don't have a medical background, but I can definitely say from my experience and just observing others that we all gained weight during Ramadan, because your body, it just starts craving, and then you inevitably binge eat. And the other thing that I wanted to just note, and this is something that was brought up by Apostate Aladdin, friend of the channel. Thank you so much for joining. I personally distrust studies by Muslim scientists. Have you seen the ridiculous study about how wearing gold supposedly lowers fertility rates? This is a justification for why Islam bans men from wearing gold. So what they did was they injected gold. I did not know about this. They injected gold into mice and then claimed that's similar to absorption through the skin. Mashallah, very scientific.
I mean,
so
sure, if you poison animals, they would probably be less fertile in general. If you
maybe, yeah, just maybe, yeah. I mean, it's really good to have this kind of information out there, because what I'm hoping for ex-Muslims watching this, or even Muslims watching this, now you know a little bit more about dry fasting and how it's not really comparable to intermittent fasting in a lot of these key ways. And if there's anything we can do is just put more information out there, because like the I guess you could call it pseudoscience that's being spread by Muslims without any good evidence really does reach and spread out to a lot of people, who then go around saying, like I used to, oh yeah, Ramadan is super healthy, yeah, it's good for you to fast, and it doesn't seem to be the case. And I also just wanted to highlight this super chat from General Skeptic. Thank you so much. Ramadan is a mandated religious fasting, as we don't have a choice. Very, very, very true. Okay, so Veedu, if you're ready, let's get on with the next segment. Okay, I think we lost Veedu momentarily. All right. Hopefully Veedu can rejoin shortly. But in the meantime, let's add our next guest for our next section. So this is going to be Surviving Ramadan as Ex-Muslims and Atheists. And I'm going to add Jimmy and Mimzy now. Hello.
Hey, hi guys.
Hi. And I think Veedu is back again, so I'll add him as well. Okay. There we go. Can see everyone. All right. So, welcome Mimzy Vids and Jimmy Bangash. I'm happy to have you here talking about this subject. So maybe you can tell people a little bit about yourselves, and then we can get on with discussing the topic.
Okay. So I'm Mimzy Vids. That's my YouTube channel name. I used to do content a while ago now for ex-Muslims, mainly on the sort of counselling side of things. So I am a counsellor and I work a lot with ex-Muslims and atheists and people that have left religions. And yeah, Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm Jimmy Bangash. I work as a psychotherapist in the UK. And similar to Mimzy, I work a lot with ex-Muslims. And, I guess a lot of that brings in the themes that you've been talking about today. So we'll be looking at kind of religion, religious trauma, and we wanted to talk about surviving Ramadan as ex-Muslims and atheists.
Yeah, so I suppose it's kind of the psychological side of things. Like you just heard Ali Rizvi talking about the physical aspects and, how it can be quite detrimental in that sense. But it's really psychologically quite difficult for ex-Muslims and atheists, particularly if they're closeted and they're living in a Muslim household. When it's Ramadan, it's like, I mean, Islam on its own is quite an OCD, intense, controlling religion. I mean, every aspect of your life is decided sort of how it should be done. You have to walk with a certain foot into the bathroom and read a dua, and you have to, like, everything is kind of, controlled. How you dress, what you eat. But then Ramadan is like everything goes up a notch, even more than that. So it's just very intense. And I think for me growing up as well, even just in a Muslim family and Muslim community, and I went to Muslim school as well, so I was really in this Muslim bubble, it really felt like even those that weren't that religious normally were suddenly the most religious and had a sort of transformation. And yeah, so for people going through this, it's interesting that there's so many things that they go through, because they might be feeling more isolated actually, because everyone around them is feeling a certain way and excited and being more religious, and then they suddenly feel even more odd. And there's also just the starvation part as well, and having to do things that you don't believe in, and then the praying. There's so much praying that we do, not we, I used to do, and you know, in the night, I think Waleed mentioned something about not getting enough sleep. So you're not eating, then you're not sleeping, and a lot of the time it's pressured and forced, you know, especially as a girl growing up with, you know, a lot of girls in my family, you know, it was not just covering and wearing hijab, but actually maybe you should be wearing abaya, you know, like maybe you should be actually like, this is Ramadan, like even if you were to do something that you would normally do, like, I don't know, wearing jeans, and a guy were to check you out in your jeans, you would get a worse sin, like, because it's like 10 times, like tenfold, because it's Ramadan, right? So it's just the intensity makes it really, really hard for people in Muslim families. Is there anything you wanted to add to that from your experience?
I think so. I think that.
Oh, Jimmy, before you get started, I just wanted to let everyone know, if you have any questions for Jimmy and Mimzy, and you're watching live, just leave them in the live chat, and our moderators will collect them, and then we'll do a little Q&A at the very end. So yeah, feel free to ask those questions in the live chat. And yeah, all right, Jimmy, sorry, you were saying.
No worries. So I was saying that it's important to kind of acknowledge, I think, what is going on. So sometimes in life, you come across a struggle and you kind of might be trying to white knuckle it and just kind of get through to the other side, right? And that can work in some instances, but in other instances, it's useful to just step back and, one, admit that this is a more intense period in your life and that it happens every single year, rather than pretending like there's something wrong with you or that you're weak or anything like that. We have to acknowledge that there's an increase in kind of stimulus here around Islam at this time of the year. And that kind of Islam on steroids is kind of how I think about it, has a corresponding internal dysregulation for people who are ex-Muslim a lot of the time. And it's okay to acknowledge that. We don't have to pretend it's not going on. And I think what we're going to be doing today is kind of talking about the different aspects, like Mimzy said.
Yeah, I think a really big thing that I think happens even more so in Ramadan, but I would say this is quite a general feeling that we feel, you know, like brown people, ethnic people kind of go through, is this feeling of like guilt and shame, especially religious people even more so, I'd say. But there is this sort of relationship with your parents and your families and communities where you feel, you know, the pressure, and maybe you're told to do something, but there's also this feeling of, I'm their kid, so I have to uphold kind of what they expect of me, and you want to please people, you know, we're kind of raised as people pleasers, aren't we? And so it's this very unhealthy relationship actually that we have with ourselves and with them, because we're trying to fulfill their needs and prioritizing what they want, and then just feeling really guilty that, whether it be that you know, we're not doing things, or we're not even believing, we might carry a lot of guilt. I know I spoke to a lot of ex-Muslims that just feel so guilty about not believing in it. It's almost like they wish they did believe in it so that they could please their families. And then, you know, as we all know, you know, Islam has this big sort of sky daddy like feeling guilty about, you know, he makes you feel guilty about not praying properly, and you have to do this, and it's all just begging for forgiveness. The whole thing is like, have you asked for forgiveness, and pray for everybody and pray for everyone's forgiveness, and we're always in the wrong, and we're always, you know, just groveling to God. And so that there is that aspect of that atmosphere of just constantly being guilty and being shameful for who we are and what we wear, and so you really absorb that energy and you kind of carry that with you, so that the guilt and the shame that we have is even more strong in this period. And I think it's really understanding that, you know, this notion of, because they're your parents and because they're your family, it doesn't mean they have ownership over you, and that concept is it seems almost obvious, but for people that grow up like this, it's so normalized that, you know, you do what your parents say because they, you know, the emotional blackmail will come in and be like, oh, you know, you were raised by them, they gave you a roof over their head, they pay for everything, they looked after, you know, they look after you all these years. And, you know, whenever I speak to to ex-Muslims, they'll say things like, oh, you know, it would kill them. Like, I can't do that to my parents. I can't not do what they want me to do. So that idea that you are bound by, you know, this relationship, and because they brought you into the world, you didn't ask for this, you know, you didn't sign a contract when you were born. So there is this sort of like letting go of the fact that actually I am my own person and I'm not bound by this. But yeah, I mean, is there something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it's like as from Doodles and you were saying, it's like actually the term emotional blackmail, like when we think about that and we think about the mechanisms, if you're, you know, one of the terms they use is fog. So if it's fear, obligation, or guilt, you know, these are kind of the mechanisms that are constructing emotional blackmail. So it's good to check in with yourself, like, what is it that you're doing? If you're going to Tarawih, you know, is it because of fear, obligation, or guilt? If that's going on, there might be some sort of emotional blackmail going on that you're experiencing. And I think it's also important to understand, like we were talking about before, that, you know, there's a spectrum of ex-Muslims, isn't it? It's really wide. So you might be like a closeted ex-Muslim living in your parents' house in a Muslim majority country. That experience is going to be very different to maybe an ex-Muslim who's out to their family and still has some connection, living in London in their own place. But even in that latter example, where arguably you have more autonomy as an individual, there's still going to be experiences of Ramadan that are, you know, it still peaks in this month. So I'm thinking of like ex-Muslims I know who work in organizations, and during Ramadan, you know, and they're not in Muslim families, they own their own place, but they go into work and Ramadan is all over the internet in their workplace. And all they see is the words Islam, Islam, Islam. They have emails coming out from HR saying, oh, please be mindful of your Muslim colleagues this month. They're going to be fasting. So if you're going to eat, be mindful about who you're eating around. And even that can feel like you're being hemmed in. You know, you work through so much to become financially independent, to get your own place, to be able to be yourself. And you're in a secular country, and then you're going into work, and the organization's HR team are emailing you, telling you to be mindful of who you're eating in front of. So again, it's just this constant dialing up of the experience of Islam in your life, even though you're not around it.
It's everywhere. And I'm sure there are girls, ex-Muslim girls and Muslim girls that go through this, but when we were not fasting, there's so much policing with Muslims anyway, as I said, but in Ramadan, oh my gosh, like when you're on your period, you're not supposed to be fasting. But even when I was like, you know, Muslim in hijab, actually sometimes when I wasn't even Muslim, I remember just passing Muslims and they'd be like, why aren't you fasting? What's going on? It's just so intense. And it's a random person. So if a random person can come and tell you like off for not, you know, for fasting, not fasting, sorry. Yeah, then your families are so intense. And you're exactly right. The spectrum is so different, you know, in a Muslim country, like where my mother's from, Morocco, it's illegal to even eat outside. So, you know, you'd be punished by law, which is completely ridiculous. So the advice that we'd give it is quite different, because it depends on where you are. So if, for example, you're in that situation where it would almost be dangerous for you to come out with, you know, I never tell people just be yourself and come out, and, you know, sometimes it's going to be dangerous, and it's not you know, fair for you to do that at all. And what you should do is find ways to kind of have your own space and find your own peace. If that means just, you know, with simple things like even just having little bits of food and water that you can kind of hide, but also just being able to take time away from the intensity of your Muslim family and having a space where you can speak to others, whether it be online or people that are like-minded. Yeah, it's really, really important to find that community. So even just this event is so important, because it's like we are here and you have people that are in the same boat as you. And, you know, we're in this together. We hear you, we see you. And it's just kind of being able to feel that and meditate on that, because we know how intense that it can be. So even just those glimpses of peace away from it all. But you know, my advice to the people in those situations generally is always, if there's a way you can move away anyhow, however it is, whether it be studying abroad or going somewhere or doing something, so you can like eventually have a goal of living your own life. Yeah, that's always the kind of end goal. Yeah.
I think it's also, you know, we should acknowledge the complexity of it, right? Because if you have like love and care and connection with your family, you know, there is going to be this experience of loneliness, that actually everybody's kind of partaking in this religious ceremony or ritual. It's quite protracted. Like a month is a long time. It's not like it's going to be over in one day. And then there's this celebration of Eid at the end of it, right? So that experience as an ex-Muslim can be quite a lonely experience. It can be a sense of loss, of grief. You can feel perhaps like a fraud, because even though you don't believe in this religion, some part of you may want to be part of that celebration, wants to be part of this ritual, wants to be connected in this way with your family. And I think that's another component, because if we don't name these things, if we don't understand what's going on, like if we don't bring it to the surface, like this, what you're actually experiencing is some level of grief around this, which is seems like a weird thing to be attributing towards leaving a religion, which we often think about as emancipation and celebration, and we're out of this trap that was kind of curtailing the way that we think. But also with that may come this sense of loss, an idea of some kind of death, you know, which is what grief is about. And I think what Mimzy was saying in terms of like looking at the resources, like how are you gonna get through this? Well, you know, I think we're halfway through the month anyway, right? If you've made it this far, well done. And also knowing that this is, you know, it's an annual event. You've made it through this in the past. You'll get through it again. And connection, I think, always with ex-Muslim stuff. I know that we both talk about like making sure that you've got some sense of community. You've got other ex-Muslims that you can reach out to and have these conversations with, because the normalization of this shared experience would do something to alleviate the experience of stress or, you know, disarray that you're going through.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Thank you so much to both of you. I think you touched on a lot of very, very important things that I can definitely relate to when I was an ex-Muslim, and the loss of community is a really big one. I do have a few questions for you from people in the live chat, and I do have one for you as well if there's time. But here's the first question. I'm just going to highlight it, and the question is from M. So the question is, how to get over the guilt of hurting your family by wearing what you want during Ramadan?
Am I going for that one?
Well, I feel like boys can wear what they want, so I'm going to give this to Mimzy.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated as well, because I also don't know the too many details about how difficult it would make your life, just because I know so many of these stories of like living in a household, like would it have ramifications for you in a different way? But generally, I do think it is, like Jimmy just said, it's very complex, because you have this real love for your family, right? You really love them and they raised you. But then on top of that, there is this emotional blackmail that we kind of mentioned. And it's this sort of like, well, I love you, there's this love, therefore you should do XYZ for me. And that's the bit that's actually not fair. And so as much as you love them, there has to be that boundary of like, I love you and I'm going to love you, and this is what love looks like for me. It's doing these things, being with you, whatever that looks like. That's fair. And then also, this is my body. This is what I choose to do. These are things that are mine, okay? I'm your child and I'm your family member, but these are things that I have a choice over, you know? And it's just having that differentiation. And it's a difficult thing to get used to. And that's why, you know, I speak to so many people about this, because it's so common to have this emotional tie to like, I have to please them. But even just the fear of them not loving you is a real fear. Like, it's like, but I need their love because they're my mum, they're my dad. I don't want to lose that. And, you know, Jimmy touched on the grief side of it. But truly, that, you know, to be your whole self and not have this compartmentalization, there needs to be this fulfillment of, this is my choice, this is my life. You really need to kind of come to that place. And if, like I said, it's kind of complicated. I don't know how your family are, but if they are a family that will come to that understanding, it could take time maybe, but there comes a place where you're like, these are my boundaries, I'm going to love you like this. And that transitional period might take time, but you can hopefully get to a place. I've seen many people, I'll say it like that anyway, I've seen many people get to a place where it looks different, the relationship looks different, but it's still, there's still love there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And can I?
Yeah, it definitely does. Please, Jimmy, go ahead.
You know, and there's this model called transactional analysis. Like every ex-Muslim everywhere should read about it. And essentially what it says is that we exist in one of three ego states, either parent, adult, or child. And when you're growing up, you know, your parents are in the parent ego state and you're in the child ego state, and you communicate in that way. But you reach a period in life where that dynamic is no longer appropriate, because you might be 18 or 20 or 30, and your parents are like 20 or 30 or 40. And really the truth is you are now two adults speaking to each other. And when we move from this mindset of child speaking to parent, which is really, I'm not okay and they're okay as the parent and they should tell me what to do. But what we want to do is move to this dynamic where it's adult to adult, which is I'm okay and you're okay. Mm-hmm. And as adults, whether you're in friendships with each other, whether it's you and your manager at work, or whether it's you and your parents, you know, the rule is really, I'm going to make some decisions and some choices in my life that are going to make you uncomfortable, Mr. Manager, parent, or my best friend, right? And similarly, my best friend, manager, or parent, you're going to make choices in your life that are going to make me uncomfortable. And I'm going to have to work through my feelings of discomfort, because you are allowed to make decisions about your finances, your religious beliefs, who you choose as a partner. You know, all of these things other adults make choices about. And it's our job to deal with our own dysregulation around that. It's not our job to tell people who they can date, what they can do with their money, etc., etc.
What they wear.
What they wear. Yeah, perfect. What they wear. So similarly, when we move to this idea that our parents are just adults and we are just adults, we're moving to the more accurate dynamic of what's actually happening, as opposed to our parents being authority figures who are dictating to us what we should wear when we're 20 years old. That isn't actually a true reflection, and you need to do some kind of psychological reframing of the relationship there.
Thank you so much. And we have time, I think, for just one more question. This one is a little bit different than questions about how to cope with family, but one that, to be honest with you, I still struggle with. And this question is from Sam Leman. How do you all deal with the idea that there's no afterlife or divine justice? I see my privilege and suffering of others, and I can't accept that some people have a bad life and then nothing afterwards.
Jimmy?
Oh my God, like this is a 2-hour podcast. Right?
You've got 2 minutes. Go.
How do I deal with it? I'm not sure I do deal with it. Actually, right? So what I don't do is walk around life with that in proximity to my mind every single day. It's not something I've really conceptualized. But I think for me, you've got this life on this planet here. I don't know, and worrying about there not being something else.
Can I see the question again? Did it say something about bad?
How do you deal with there not being divine justice afterwards, I think. So I don't know, it's almost like saying, how do you deal with the fact that there isn't a unicorn around the corner? There just isn't. This is the reality of life. It doesn't exist, and I deal with what's in front of me and what's real, I guess.
I think I kind of get that. It's quite depressing to think of it like that, but it's like, I think the person is saying that it's a bad life, but that's not what you know, if you have a bad life, then I think it's this Muslim mentality of like, you are going to be in punishment in the dunya, like you have to go through all this pain and struggle, and then your life's going to be amazing, and then you're going to have all the virgins if you're a guy, and then it's like this fantasy world, and then do you know? So it's like, and then you can have rivers of wine, but you can't have wine in this life, right? So okay, that's my husband, guys. Okay, so anyways, so anyway, I get that it's kind of like bursting that bubble, but I feel, to be honest, I feel the opposite. I felt like, oh wait, I don't have to live like that. I don't have to be like suffering for the next life to then be like, woo, we made it. Like, you can be like, this life, I'm going to make the most out of it, whatever I can possibly do to make the most out of that. And I think that's, you know.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think the question is like, there are some people who do really bad things and they're not going to get.
Is that what it was
punished in
saying?
hell.
Was it about?
I think that's part of it, you know,
That's
because
part
there's
of the divine
there's going to be
justice.
the people who suffer, and then the ones who also,
Oh, that
perpetrate suffering and then get
Okay.
away with it, essentially.
Oh, okay, that's a different question. Okay, see, I've actually had that question before. Like, what about the rapists and the murderers? They're not going to go to hellfire, right? Okay, so for me, I feel very differently, especially working in the mental health field. I feel like you feel very differently about this concept of even just like bad people. It just, you know, the very simplistic idea of like, there's good and there's bad, and then bad punished and then the good, like that just doesn't fit in the real reality of psychology. Why, you know, there's genetics of why people are the way that they are. There's environmental influences that have happened. There are triggers. There are things, deeper things there that are not just this person is a bad person and deserves eternal punishment. So sorry, go on.
No, I think I was going to say the same thing. It's like, even if you are a rapist, listen, even if somebody came and murdered me in my sleep after raping me, I don't want them tortured for eternity. That's just a really sick concept. That somebody who committed some evil deed would then and it's not even like they'd just be in hell. They would be like, you know, burning from fire hotter than the sun, drinking hot pus and their throat exploding, to then reform and have that done to them. That is just sick, and that is not divine justice. That is really a terrorizing, fear-inducing corruption to try and force you to follow something out of fear, you know, obligation or guilt. It's just another mechanism of emotional blackmail, but it's using the fear component of it. And I don't see that as divine justice.
Yeah, and it's the opposite. Sorry, and that person was saying, how do I stop believing that? And I think both of us were kind of a bit like, oh, because for me anyway, that was one of the reasons I stopped believing in it, is because I was like, wait, this is ridiculous. And so for me, that was one of the things that made it so ridiculous. I was like, I can't believe that this is divine justice. There's no way this makes any sense.
Because even in our not divine but very mortal conception, we have proportionality around a crime. So if someone commits a crime like rape, they go to jail, but they don't go to jail for as long as they do if they murder somebody. They go to a longer jail for a longer period of time. The aim, hopefully, is always rehabilitation. Hell has no rehabilitation objective. Like, you're just there to be tortured. That is not divine justice. I guess, let me put it this way. One of the reasons I don't worry about divine justice is because our mortal justice system is better. You know, like it really is focused on rehabilitation, getting people to do the time for their crime and then come back into the world. Hopefully, whilst they're in prison, we are upskilling them. They are learning new skills. They're getting psychotherapeutic help. They come back into the world with the possibility of undertaking some kind of career. Like, that is better than the divine justice in the Quran. And also, it is sad we don't get to live forever. I do agree. You know, we can hold many things.
Yeah, it's true. They can be in the same room at the same time. But yeah, we could do a whole podcast on this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna come back to you on this one.
Okay. No. That was given the time constraint, you did very well with that really tough question. There are more questions for you, but unfortunately, we do have to move on to the next topic.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe if there's time at the very, very end, we can see if we can get to that. But thank you so much to both of you for sharing your perspectives. And everyone, if you want to just find out more about Jimmy and Mimzy, we did leave the names of everyone participating in the video description, and I might try adding a few links for people who don't have links there. So if you want to contact them or if just find out more about them, we can find out that way. But yeah, take care.
Take care.
And yeah,
Bye.
thanks again for coming on. All right. So Veedu,
Wow.
well,
That was interesting.
lots of heavy stuff there. But again, the same with Ali Rizvi's section. I think it's really important to talk about these things because there really isn't a place to talk about them
Yep.
in the Muslim world, just in general. And I mean, I always think about people who maybe need, help with their mental health in a Muslim country or Muslim community. But what the challenge is, who can they talk to? Their parents, a therapist who is also Muslim.
Exactly.
It's
that's a huge
a
challenge.
really big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we jump to the next topic, I just wanted to highlight a couple more super chats just to say thank you. Thank you, Late Night Kaiju, who says, for those compelled to do Ramadan, you're in the home straight. It's almost over. All the best getting it over with. And General Skeptic, thank you again. I want to concur with Jimmy. If you're an independent grown person in a non-Muslim country like the UK, please own your space. Don't give in. You only live once. Okay, so we're going to now introduce our next guests. Let me see if they're both ready. Okay, I think they are. So these people are both huge inspirations for me, and especially one of them, I'll explain why in a second. So I'm going to add Zara K and Haram Doodles. Hello. Zara, you're muted. We need to hear your beautiful voice.
I was containing myself for this entry. Mashallah, sister. Mashallah.
Okay, sorry. No, I can't do this.
We tried.
So for everyone who might not know who you are, and I would find that hard to believe, especially in this space, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you're working on. Zara, you're someone who I've known since pretty much the early days of when I started talking about why I left Islam on social media. So you'll always have a special place in my heart for that. And Ali Rizvi as well, his book, The Atheist Muslim, was also a huge inspiration for me to know that, whoa, it's actually possible to criticize Islam and you're not going to be, gunned down or ostracized. Well, some people unfortunately are, but not everyone is. So that's always encouraging to see, to be honest. So yeah, please tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Zara, go for it.
Human. I was going to say human, female. I don't know. I am from Tanzania. I'm Australian, and I work with Faithless Hijabi, which popped up on one of the chats as well. That provides mental health support to ex-Muslims globally. That's what I do. And also for Secular Spirit. Yeah, thank you for reminding me how old I am by going back to the prehistoric era.
It wasn't that long ago, just a couple of years.
Prehistoric.
And Haram Doodles, feel free to share.
Hi, everyone. I go by Doodles, Haram Doodles. I started, basically just brought my childhood love of art back to life after I became an ex-Muslim and really kind of found a little more safety in my life as well. I'm originally South Asian family, and I live in the US right now. And I'm really glad to be here. And you can find my work on Instagram at Haram Doodles.
Wonderful. And the topic for today is also, again, very important one: women fasting and even more furious. So yeah, I'll leave the floor for you to share as much as you'd like.
Sounds good. So Zara,
Wait, they're still on screen.
Yeah, get out of here.
Yeah, can you give the ladies the space?
Happy Atheist Day.
Thanks, you too. It's the 23rd somewhere.
Yeah, I know.
Australia, I think Australia.
Yeah. I'm really glad we're here talking and also just kind of sharing about being ex-Muslim women and how we navigated Ramadan as well in our own families. So, Zara, what was your experience like?
Well, I grew up in a Shia community, so I went to the community school as well, which was, every day anyway, you wear the hijab and, you have a certain dress code. And we had to pray. So, you had to pray at whenever it was like Zohar and Asr, and Shias prayed together as soon as we prayed, but time separated. And Ramadan was particularly challenging because while we were still segregated, like the girls and the boys, we still had male teachers. So when you weren't fasting, you always had to hide and eat or like under the desk because it's lunchtime and everybody's, that lunchtime. So what do? You're just like hiding and then hoping that nobody passes by, not the cleaners, not the teachers. And that was like schooling. And then you'd go home and then there's just a whole round of other things that you would do, which is, the chores, working with your mom. And really like if you weren't fasting, and I had a lot of migraines growing up. So if you weren't fasting, it's always like this question, I think Mimzy also mentioned, like, why aren't you fasting? And then like, what do you come up with? I'm sick. Like, I don't want to fast. And most times, like, my parents were a bit more flexible in the sense like you had to fast, but if you really could not, they're like, it's okay. My mom was very patient. She was like, oh, it's okay, here, just drink a bit. It's the intention that counts. But it took us a while to even get to that more softer place. What about you?
Yeah. It was definitely not softer for me. It was like, you better be fasting or have a really good excuse for why you're not fasting. You better be dying if you're not going to fast. And so the period was literally the only way I could get away with not fasting. And then obviously like adding a few more days, like, oh, it's still not done yet. Or, oh, it started early. So at least maybe the best scenario was when the first week and the last week you would get your period and then be able to extend it out. So you're maybe fast a week, 2 weeks in between.
Or just gaslight the person and just go like, no, it wasn't on Tuesday. It started on Thursday. Just like,
right. And
I didn't know you were keeping track of my periods.
right. Like it's enough policing that's happening anyway in our families. And I do remember my mom constantly like just asking me like, oh, is it done yet? When are you going to pray? And then also you had to like do the ghusl, the shower right after your period, just so you can like, you're pure again and you can pray again. And so, and I remember even going to school, and I think at the time when I was really young, there was maybe a sense of feeling different and feeling cool. Like I could miss gym. I didn't have to like, sit through lunch period. I could like do my own thing. And so I think growing up, I felt like almost cool about it. Like, oh, I was the different one out of this whole school of like white Americans. But at the end of the day, like after a while, I just started getting really tired of it and like just not wanting to fast at all. And I think this is why women are fasting and even more furious in Ramadan, because they just have to do so much more work. Like I remember watching my mom as well, like literally just cooking at any hour. She was always in the kitchen, and either I felt bad for her or I was made to feel guilty for not being in the kitchen with her. And I think that was something that I think a lot of us dealt with as well as women and girls in the families of just being just because we're girls and women, we're expected to be in the kitchen and prepare all the things for the man babies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think most definitely like with like the chores as well, it's always the mothers, and it's somehow like I was just researching online on women's obligations during Ramadan, and they were like, you have this, and there was a website that says you have this unique opportunity to not just fast and serve your God, but also serve your household. Like, yes. Yes, that's the opportunity. Thank you for putting it on a silver platter.
A hard pass on that unique opportunity.
It was crazy. Like now that I remember, it was like, you're right. Like my mom was in the kitchen the entire time. There's also this pressure of making amazing food or like this iftar specific food that we usually wouldn't have throughout the year. And that takes a lot of time because, she's always like, my kids are hungry and they need to eat this good food. And the pressure was just on her like the entire time.
Right.
But like, even like with periods, it was, for me, I guess for Shias, it was after I think maybe 7 days or something. So it's called irregular period. There's a time limit. You had to perform ghusl and fast anyway. So even if you were bleeding, like if you had PCOS or any other issues with your menstrual cycle, you still had to fast after that period.
Yeah, same. And
And
even
it was
grew up Sunni, but I think there's a lot of things that we have similarities with, especially when it comes to the women, of course. I remember even like just being expected to be there in the morning, like doing suhoor, or we'll call it sehri in Urdu, but like being there in the morning, and just so my dad and male family members wouldn't find out. And it was just so ridiculous. I'm like, this is natural function of my body that is instantly labeled as impure and harm. And it's also attached to like sex, because in the Quran it's like, okay, men, you can't have sex with your wives when they're on their period. And so just the shame and stigma that's around period too, it's just really exhausting after a while. And it's just tiring that you have to put up a front, right? Like you're just sort of faking it in front of them. It just felt so disingenuous. And just always felt like I was like, I don't know, like felt guilty about it too.
It was like you're made to feel shameful about your own bodies, but then also you'd have the men tell you, oh, well, at least you get your period, so you can't fast, so you don't have to fast the entire month. And then like it was a blessing, and I'm like, hi, I'm sorry, have you had PMS, have you had menstrual cramping, do you want to swap bodies? But it's
bodies.
it's like something that you're going through that is for some women quite difficult as well, like with the cramping, and like one, made to feel shame about having your period, but then all the bodily functions that also come that are painful. And then on top of that, somebody's like putting cherries on top of it, and I'm like, I have to pay back this fast. Right. Like it's not like you're just not fasting for the 7 days and you're like, oh, you can do it whenever. Right. And I think in Shia Islam, you had to pay back before the next Ramadan.
Yeah, same in Sunni Islam. And I think, and that was interesting too, it's like, okay, men have to make up fasts for, if they're traveling or if they're ill, they have to make up those fasts. For women, we have to make up fasts for if we're traveling, if we're ill, if we have our period, if we're pregnant, if we're breastfeeding, like whatever that case is, we have to make up all of them. Not that I ever did. Pretended to.
It was more like, yeah, well, I remember, but maybe I'll fast today. But then I like that you mentioned the pregnancy and breastfeeding, because when I was researching like stuff like in the Western world, like around Ramadan for women, it was also mentioned that you still have to fast. It's only if there's harm to your baby and you. So there's still some novelty attached to like you going through it and like making the tough decisions because you want to be so close to Allah, and you can continue fasting at that health risk as well, like outside of just not being pregnant or breastfeeding, etc. There's still risks to it, and then on top of this, like you're adding more to it. Right. And they're like, oh, it's more like, oh, only if you're at risk, so you give away your life, and then you do the chores as well, like just continue spending that day serving others, at the cost of your own bodies.
Like, as if it wasn't enough that we were made from the rib and like we're giving away our life anyway the whole time that we're in Islam. And then you have these like ridiculous rules around what we can do. And I think what's ridiculous too is that dry fasting is harmful. And so why would a pregnant woman or even a woman that's breastfeeding put herself through that, right? And so even that like notion that like, oh, if it's not harming the baby, you can fast. And no, it's like, no, it's harming the woman herself. What about her?
You're a person. And you actually just reminded me like about like when we were talking about the shame. When I was in Malaysia, so obviously women are visibly Muslims, like they wear the hijab, etc. When I was in Malaysia and my friend was also Muslim, but I guess kind of Muslim, but he wasn't fasting and I wasn't fasting. And then we went to actually eat. We sat down and he orders food and his food comes. And I was like, oh, where's my food? They're like, oh, we packed takeaway for you. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, you can't eat here.
Okay.
And I'm like, what? Like, why can he eat and I can't? And also, I'm not Malay. Like, I'm obviously quite visibly like a tourist or a student. But they were like, no, we can't allow you to eat here. And I'm like, that was crazy. And I think, and I think even in like Dubai until maybe a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6, you couldn't, I think restaurants couldn't serve food. Mm-hmm. to people, or they'd be closed, most of them, and they'd start opening up like later in the evening.
Yeah.
But I can only imagine like that just makes things harder for women, because then men can get away with like not fasting, whatnot, and like eating or being tourists or not Muslims. But like as a woman, I couldn't.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, so not.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just gonna say you can. Yeah, for us, it's just not. There's no getting away. Like we're constantly being policed too, right? Like whether it's our family or a community or like the auntie living next door that's like keeping an eye on us.
At work, like this week, so I have a colleague who is Muslim, but like he fasts only on the weekend. But then one day he did actually fast on the weekday. So we were all eating, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're not gonna?" He's like, "I'm fasting, but I can just sit here." We're like, "Okay." And then the next day he pulls out like a protein bar, and everyone's like, "Are you not fasting?" So we were so used to like he's gonna fast, maybe he's gonna continue fasting.
Yeah.
And then everybody just looked at him and shamed him. And I'm like, God, this is what women have to go through every time. That like, people go like, "Oh, you're not fasting." And I remember like even working, and I was like, okay, well, I have to eat. And it's lunchtime. It's not like I can't not eat if I'm not fasting. And then people were like, "Oh, are you fasting today?" They're not. I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel like it. I had to always come up with excuses instead of tell people that, hey, I'm on my period, so I can't fast.
Right, which is so stupid too, right? It's like something I'm dealing with every dang month, and I have to make excuses for it. Like it made no sense to me, and after a while I actually just got really tired of it, and I would openly be like, "Yep, I have my period." I didn't even care.
Yeah.
And I could see my dad or like my brother like kind of going, "Ooh," but
Don't tell us.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. I was like, I don't care if you're cringing. I'm so done being like, sort of shy and like hiding this and like being all secretive about it. Interestingly, actually, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, especially around your own family as well. Like if you can't eat at home, where are you going to eat?
Exactly.
Like,
and just the notion that like apparently my dad or my brother finding out would be just really shameful for them to know, and it's because it's like so like the sexualization that happens, right? Even with our period, it's a sexualization that's happening in Islam. And so one thing I did was I asked on my Instagram stories of like just ex-Muslim women and what they're dealing with and what they deal with during Ramadan, and so it just got really great responses. I wanted to share a few. Getting told that I'm going to go to hell like on a daily basis, pretending to fast, to pray, to make dua before iftar. Only women can cook and clean while men don't even bother helping and stand and giving orders. Yup. Just being told to wake up for suhoor even when we're not fasting. A dad constantly yelling at this person's mom for not making iftar right after her 9-to-5 job. Like, how ridiculous is that, right? Like, the fact that men grow up as really just being babied and entitled to sit there and wait for women to serve them. And it's not unique to Islam, but I think what I just wanted to mention too is that like the fact that this is really apparent in our culture, our wider culture, but it's also in Islam too, because it is based on the patriarchy, and it's because there's so much sexism and misogyny. And I think one thing that, I was going to ask you actually about this too, because obviously like Islam is all about procreate or else, right? It's just what's expected of us just because we're women. It's like our roles are limited to being wives, daughters, and mothers. Do you think that it's just really like a regional authority, like it's only happening in like regional authoritarian countries and fundamentalist communities? Or do you think it's just a denial of how systemic like women's roles are defined in Islam?
I think the latter, because I've never yet found one Muslim community where women can eat freely, on their periods or not have to hide it. Even the progressive Muslims who may not pray every day during the year or not wear a hijab. Like I remember in school, then some people would start wearing a hijab, like during Ramadan. So it's like, where people would stop drinking alcohol during Ramadan, the women would like, oh yeah, for Ramadan, I'm going to wear a hijab as well.
Yeah.
So I think
give up everything, right? Become even more religious. And of course, people love that. When the women get more religious, it's like, oh, look at that. Like the visible people in our community, they're going to get more religious. So people are going to see this too. Already women were like the burden of wearing the hijab anyways. Yeah.
Fair. I think we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
And Secret Spirit is like pushing
Quickly.
us out. I know, right?
I know I don't want to be in
into
that position, but I think there's a few questions for you in the live chat. So I just was hoping to give them some time to get your perspective. And the first one's really interesting. So let me just highlight it here. So the question is from Suman Koke. How can I better support Muslim women in my life? So Muslim women who I care about who do choose to fast.
Order takeout. Don't make them cook. Or I think just being supportive to what they need, because I feel like other women might find, I guess, your support a bit more like, oh, I don't know what you can change for me in the home. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's not like you can change, we're not here to change other people's minds. Everyone's on their own journey. And if you want to support Muslim women in your life, cook them something, make them something nice, right? Like, you don't have to be that one to tell them like, oh, why are they fasting? Or, even giving them like guilt trip or shaming them for fasting, because yeah, they're doing their thing and they'll figure it out. We all figured it out for ourselves. And here we are today as ex-Muslims. But really just being there for them is probably the best you can do.
Amazing. And one question from Chance Goldstein, and you can answer this to as much as an extent as you want. Are you both still in contact with your families, or have you gone no contact?
I'm still in touch with my family. We always ask each other, "Are you fasting today?" I just say yes. It took me years to and sometimes they'll just ask because even if they don't know, like they haven't done it this year, but like other years, they're like, "Are you fasting?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do, in my own way, my relationship with your God."
My relationship with God. I'm in touch with my family too, but of course I remain closeted, and so I, if my mom calls and asks me, am I fasting? I'll be like, yeah, I am. Because I just don't have the energy to fight with her. She's also old and I just don't have, I'd rather just keep the peace with her and not make her sick from me just trying to be myself. But yeah, I do appreciate having some family around me, and it just helps me be connected and be a little more grounded and like kind of, just even with siblings and cousins and stuff. So yeah.
I do miss Eid though, and I do miss like the iftar vibes where we'd all sit on the table for 10 minutes, like eat quickly, and then we're done. We don't talk for the rest of the night.
And then I would try to find an excuse. The minute prayers would start, I'd be like, I gotta go.
Bye.
Deuces.
And I've got one question for you too, because I think we still have a little bit of time before we jump to our next topic with Muhammed, Syed, and Maryam Namazie, which I'm also looking forward to. This question is from me. So, what do you say to people who will argue that Islam is a feminist religion, or here's a specific one, you've both definitely heard this. Islam actually introduced more rights to women 1400 years ago than they had at the time. So it's actually progressive. And one of the examples I remember being taught as a kid was how there used to be this tradition of burying newborn girls, basically to kill them because they were seen as a burden, and Islam put an end to that. So I'm guessing you've probably heard that too. So yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
You can start first.
I want to roll my eyes really hard at this. We hear that a lot. And I think just logically, it was the 7th century. There was nothing called women's rights. There was nothing called LGBTQ rights, right? Like none of that existed. Women were chattel. They were treated like they were just there as servants for men. Even when you read the Quran, right? Like my first question was, why is Allah not talking to women? why is he not talking to me when I'm reading this Quran? Why is he talking to men and giving men the guidance of how to treat women, right? So even that like separation was so apparent when I went back and reread the Quran. So just, I think it's just these excuses. We try to, it's that thing of like fitting a circle into a square. Like it's these like sort of excuses just to make Islam sound cool for this day and age when, I'm sorry, it wasn't cool. It wasn't cool for women at all, for girls, right? And girls to women, right? Like at any age, we know the Prophet married a child. And so even that being like excused, like, oh, that was then, and girls matured faster back then. No, they didn't. There's just horrible laws around that time. And we still are dealing with child marriages to this day.
I think the other things that I'd like to add is that, Islam, or maybe, most religions, have this really nice way of wrapping up just half truths and giving it to you so that you believe it. Like these were things that I was told when I was like, in primary school, in madrasa, that, Islam did this, the wars were fought out of defense, Muhammad killed nobody, he was a noble man, and all of these lies. And then you just embed it in your mind, and then you use that as an adult to just like defend the criticism that's coming out. So really just validating like, what happened in the 7th century, and then also in a specific community and in specific countries, and not looking at like, how did other people live around it? And if Islam did bury girls, and how were kids born? Like, did they just select a few girls? So clearly there were families that, didn't have that practice. And also like the ridiculous things on like slavery as well. They were like, there were no slaves in Islam. And I'm like, really, Bilal? Like, it's just like this lies that you're like the rose ones that you just want to embed and like tell yourself, yes, this is true. This is what I'm going to believe. And then really living in that time and not moving forward. And that's where like, women's roles as well. Like if you look at the women's roles now, it's very, it's very, systematic. There's so many systematic issues in like Islamic laws, but then also in like constitutions as well, where women can't work, where women can't see. Like even like especially like countries like Malaysia, like women in hijab couldn't eat outside.
Right.
So I wonder what rights they're talking about. Like I wonder what rights actually elevate women in specifically Islam.
None. None of the above.
Well, that's a good place to end things. None of the above. So thank you so much, Zara and Haram Doodles. It was a real pleasure to hear from both of you, and thank you for answering my question as well.
We are.
Which right?
No, that's
oh my god! No. Oh my god! Yeah, there we go. There we go. Excellent job. Okay, so I'm going to say, unfortunately, goodbye to both of you. Very sad to do so, but it must be done because our next guests are ready and waiting. So thank you again. And Zara and Haram Doodles will be still in the live chat, I believe.
Yep.
So yeah, okay, perfect. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Okay, so I think Veedu's having some technical issues, but we're just going to keep going. And I'm going to introduce our two guests. So I have little bios to read for them as well. So first of all, I have Maryam Namazie, an Iranian-born award-winning activist, writer, and spokesperson for the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain and One Law for All. She has led numerous campaigns against Islamic fundamentalism and censorship, and organized the Celebrating Dissent conferences, the largest gatherings of ex-Muslims in history. And I met Maryam in person in Oslo last year at one of them. Welcome, Maryam. It was a real honor to meet you.
Hi, thank you. It was an honor to meet you too, and I'm so glad to be here. And I've just been enjoying the conversation so far, and I hope I can contribute. I'm worried that I won't be able to match the brilliance I've already seen.
I'm sure you definitely will. And I also want to introduce now Muhammed, Syed, who will be your co-speaker on this topic, which is very important one, which is advocacy for ex-Muslims and atheists. So Muhammed is a human rights activist, writer, speaker, and community organizer. He's also the founder and president of Ex-Muslims of North America, the first ex-Muslim advocacy and community building organization in North America. And you can actually tune in to XMNA's channel right now to watch this live stream as well. They're going to be up on both this channel and that channel. For people who are not watching live, you can check it out anytime you want. share with friends, family, if it's safe to do so, of course. And last thing I want to mention is that Muhammad has been a human rights activist for over a decade, with a focus on efforts to normalize religious dissent, which is my objective as well, and to promote acceptance of secularism in Muslim communities. Muhammad, you're added right now. Hello. Oh, I think you're muted, Muhammad. So you just have to turn on your mic. There you go.
Great to meet you and great to be here. And Maryam, it's been a while. Hope everything's great.
So yeah, I just want to leave the stage, leave the floor for you to just discuss this really important topic of advocacy, which is something that you've both dedicated your lives to.
Thank you. Hi, Muhammad. Lovely to see you.
Same here. So I think we're going to go first. You had an engagement phone, I remember.
Okay, I wasn't, I think we had talked about speaking about the sort of laws and policies in the countries that we live in, so Britain and you in the United States, on how those affect ex-Muslims and the sort of advocacy work that we're doing. So I think from, if we're looking at the question of Britain, even though it's a very secularized society and a large number of people don't really have a religion, they don't necessarily want a religion's role in the state, Britain is not a secular state in any way, shape or form. So for example, you've got bishops in the House of Lords, kind of like the Ayatollahs in the Majlis in Iran. You've got prayers in Parliament. I mean, I can't get over that. You know, they pray in Parliament. Prayers in schools, for example. And of course, the Church of England is the established church. And so there's a huge influence that religion plays. And I think, in a sense, when we look at the influence now that Islamists have and Islam has and other religious groups have, it is because there is this privileging of religion, and also there is this attempt to keep hold of the society by the Church of England. And it's a way of giving equal access to other religions, as a way of maintaining its own power too. So, you know, in Britain, we've got Sharia courts, we've got a large number, 1/3 of publicly funded schools, imagine, are faith schools. I mean, it's outrageous, you know. And so there's so many examples where with Sharia courts too, there's a Jewish Beth Din, there's now a Sikh court. It's the first of its kind. There are no Sikh courts in India, but they are, the first of its kind is in Britain. So this is a very secular society, but a very religiously privileging society when it comes to the state and public policy and all of that. And of course, that has huge effects on ex-Muslims and atheists in this country. You know, one example, of course, is the freedom of expression issue, which is something that we're all very concerned about. You know, in Britain and in Scotland, blasphemy laws have been abolished. It's still applicable in Northern Ireland, but even though it's abolished, we do have sort of backdoor blasphemy laws via accusations of Islamophobia, for example, and even using things like public disturbance, which is really about disturbing individuals, now being used when Islam is being criticized as a way of sort of silencing dissent and criticism. And that has a huge effect on ex-Muslims, because, you know, we need to be able to speak about so many of the issues that we face, and it is quite difficult to do so. And so I think I'll stop there, because there's so many things to talk about, but I think I'll stop there, and then maybe
so I'll start with
well,
drawing a contrast with the US. And so in in that sense, we're very lucky in the US. We don't have that state-sanctioned religion aspect of it. The Constitution of the US is very, very clear about how freedom of speech is one of our basic rights. Freedom of and from religion is one of our basic rights. There shall be no interference of practicing of religion. The reality obviously is slightly different, but the First Amendment is about free speech. What happened and has happened over the past decade or two, both in Europe and over here, has been a groundswell from both political sides to try to limit that. As you said, backdoor blasphemy laws. What you experienced at Warwick University, where they tried to shut you down, that happened over here. We had tours that you participated in the US in various cities on campuses, and multiple ones were shut down. And it's viewed as an ex-Muslim, if you're speaking out about certain issues, that's taboo. You're not allowed to do that. And to a great extent, that was done by the left, where they silenced oppositional views of all form and were very, very illiberal. So it wasn't state sanctioned per se, but the effect was very similar, because you had pressure being applied to individuals from their employment. If you lose your employment, you can't really do much else. And then you had political pressure from the left, which was able to influence social media. So most large social media companies are based in the US, and so that sort of political pressure made a big difference with the Facebook and Twitter and stuff. They banned ex-Muslims in mass, like many ex-Muslims from the Arab world, from over here. We run Wiki Islam. Wiki Islam was banned on Facebook entirely. So even though we have laws in the US that are, in my opinion, much better than Europe for the protection of individual liberty, there are ways around that. And the people that don't really care about liberty were able to circumvent them to a great extent. Recently, what's been going on over the past year, as everybody knows, is the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and we have the other side coming in, and that has relaxed some stuff regarding freedom of speech. Facebook is not as restricted. Wiki Islam is now available on Facebook again due to the political wind shifting. But then you have the other side doing the opposite. You have immigration-related issues, Muslim ban-related issues. So it's just which flavor of bad are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case. And I think also, I mean, we do focus a lot on sort of left-wing silencing of dissent, very often under the excuse of protecting Muslims from bigotry. And, it's wonderful to stop bigotry against Muslims. Obviously, that's something we're all in agreement on. But this idea that criticizing religion or the religious right is the same as bigotry against Muslims is something we've all talked about for many decades. And it's, it is definitely a way of silencing criticism and stopping people from speaking out. But I think also, I mean, in a sense, the right wing very often promotes itself as pro-free expression. But again, that's really not the case, because it's pro-free expression to speak against Muslims and against migrants, and pro-free expression when it comes to Tommy Robinson speaking. But if you have students who are pro-Palestinian, for example, on a university campus, they're very happy to have them even deported. So I think, again, this idea that it's the right wing that defends free speech is not really true. In fact, a lot of the governments in power are right wing, and they are, via the law, restricting freedom of expression as well. So I think this whole this idea that it's woke politics that stops people from speaking, I think in a way is used to really remove scrutiny of how the right and increasingly the far right are trying to stop freedom of expression.
Say, if your views align with whichever group or not, they will stop you. It doesn't matter what the specific views are. So there's a quote, this is from an Abbasid Caliph, Abu Abbas: "Tolerance is laudable except in matters dangerous to religious belief." You could restate that today: tolerance is laudable except in matters dangerous to political belief, and that'll apply to both sides.
Yeah, no, definitely that is the case. And I mean, I think, there is this constant pressure on us on, why do you need to say these things? Why do you have to offend people, hurt people's feelings and sensibilities? And it's become reduced, this whole argument on the right to expression. I mean, it's such a fundamental right. It's a cornerstone of so many rights, and in effect, it's really one of the only things we have as ex-Muslims, as free thinkers, as those who want to challenge the status quo. It's really one of the only things we have in order to be able to do that. Use our writing, our voices, our bodies, even as a way of resisting and standing up for really the rights of non-believers to be able to speak and think as they choose and live as they choose without fear. And so reducing this fundamental right to, and trivializing it to something that is just about the other side's hurt feelings and hurt sensibilities is also, I think, in a way, part and parcel of trying to silence you, because nobody wants to hurt anyone's feelings. No one wants to offend people unnecessarily. And the fact of the matter is, when we listen to surahs of the Quran, or when we listen to hadith, or when we listen to Sharia judges or Islamists talking about how ex-Muslims should be killed or apostates should, be shunned, and gay people, are perversions, and women who don't wear the veil are sluts. All of the things that we often hear, nobody asks about our hurt feelings. And again, because it doesn't matter. Hurt feelings are irrelevant, really. My feelings are hurt all the time, to be honest. But it's irrelevant in this debate, because it is a way, again, I think, of just silencing this sort of challenge to the status quo, which is hugely important.
One deeper thing is that why are we having this speech to begin with? Why are we having these conversations that are challenging and offensive to begin with? It infantilizes Muslims and Muslim societies that they can't have these conversations, and these conversations are crucial for change to happen. The West did not have free speech. The West did not have the freedoms that it enjoys today. Blasphemy was common, and all of these changes happened because people challenged the status quo. They stood up. They purposefully blasphemed. They forced people to rethink ideas to the point where we are living in a relatively free society now, and maybe it was freer a few years ago. But if you don't allow people to actually change and adapt and confront the contradictions that exist within their belief, they can never grow. So essentially, people that are trying to stop us from speaking or stop anybody from challenging the status quo, no matter what that status quo is, are saying you're not an adult. You can't actually handle reality. And to me, that is much more offensive than anything we'd ever possibly say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, apostate, Aladdin just mentioned some people want to hurt feelings on purpose, or they do it for fun. And I'm sure I'm considered one of those people, but for example, the Allah is gay sign at Pride. I mean, we were almost barred from marching in Pride again. We were accused of anti-Muslim hatred and, Islamophobia. And it took 8 months for Pride to decide whether they would let us back again. A lot of this, for example, the topless protests I've done, a lot of the work we do when it is challenging taboos and challenging the sacred, it is considered offensive. It is considered something that hurts the other's feelings. And I think that, the question is, I'm sorry if your feelings are hurt, but in the same way that hearing the Quran or listening to the Azan hurts my feelings and makes me physically ill, you can also manage to tolerate opinions of those who hurt your feelings. And the point is that freedom of speech is not dependent on whether you hurt people's feelings or not. And I think the point I want to make too is that the hurt feelings of it's something that we're often told, but I think it's really a cover. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a cover to stop people from speaking, because, as I said, our hurt feelings don't seem to matter.
So,
and that is, I think, an important point to make.
So the idea of your feelings being hurt is maybe relevant in a monoculture of some form, where your feelings are the only feelings that matter and your ideas are the only ones that matter. If you live in a pluralistic society, if you have Muslims and Christians living together, you have by default offensive feeling, because one person views the one individual as a prophet, the other views it as a god. Same with if you have atheists and Muslims or ex-Muslims or any differing groups that exist. So in an Islamic conception of the world, it's like we're the only people that matter, and therefore pluralism is irrelevant. But we do not want to live in that world, and I think most people in the world, outside of Muslim fundamentalists, do not want to live in that world. So going back to what I think Apostle Alain was talking about regarding deliberately creating offense, that's great, because people need to be challenged. If you don't believe others have the right to say things that you don't like, that's a you problem. You have to grow up and become an adult and participate in an adult world. When the coronavirus stuff was going on, there was a surah that an Algerian atheist in France put out, Surah Corona, and it was just text, and an Algerian girl was sentenced to jail for posting that on Facebook. Like, it was simply saying something like wash your hands and be careful when going out and buying food. It was anodyne as hell, but to them it was enough that they were willing to jail people over it. So the line of what is and isn't offensive is very variable and depends on the individual and how exposed to reality they have been.
I mean, I also think that this whole conversation, on offense, it's really looking at the question of blasphemy from the perspective of those who are in power. And I think that's also key when we're discussing this issue, to remember that, because in a sense, when we hear things like this is hurtful, this is offensive, it's really those in power that are pushing this narrative and that are trying to promote this climate that doesn't allow people to be able to question those in power in particular, who are trying to maintain religion's role. And so I think also that aspect of it is important. The fact of the matter is that when we speak about freedom of expression, it is the freedom of those who are powerless, the freedom of those who do not have anything but their expression in order to challenge the status quo. And so limiting that is really it helps and aids those in power, and is to the detriment of those who have none and are trying to gain some rights for themselves.
Change happens through two means, either violence or convincing people. So if you're closing off the avenue of convincing people by limiting speech, you're only leaving the avenue of violence. And that is generally available to the powerful, not the weak.
Thank you so much for both of you. Like, these are like really, really difficult topics, like really challenging ones to go through in just 20 minutes. But I think you both did a really great job, and it's definitely sparked some interest in the live chat. I think we have time for one or two quick question and answers, a little brief Q&A. So this question, I'm going to try and rephrase it a little bit just so it was a little confusing when I first read it. So this question from Asma, Asma's basically asking, do you think Muslims in the UK will listen to you more if they don't know that you're an atheist, but if you pretend to be a Muslim fighting fundamentalism and extremism and advocating for rights? So basically, instead of coming out and saying, I'm an atheist, I left Islam, maybe they'll just, not even want to bother listening to you. But if you, come at it from an angle where you're still Muslim, they might want to listen to you better.
I mean, I think this is always, I think this conversation always looks at the issue from the perspective of those in power. And I think it's so ingrained in us that we feel that it's part of our arguments as well. I mean, I think, do we tell Muslims that you pretend to be an atheist so that I will better understand your Quran and your Hadith and your...
That's a good idea for Atheist Day.
The fact of the matter is that apart from anything else, do ex-Muslims and atheists have a right to say who they are and express their beliefs just as anyone else does, and to be able to advocate for their position just as anyone else does? And I think that's really important. And whether people will listen to you more or not, the point is that do we not first and foremost have a human right to express ourselves and criticize religion and blaspheme?
So I would add, sorry, go ahead. So I would add there are two levels to this. One on a larger advocacy scale. So what Maryam was talking about, like in the sense that if we're not speaking out, and if we're not like every time you're publicly speaking out as an ex-Muslim, it inspires other people to speak out in their individual context. Either they're coming out publicly, they're becoming advocates themselves, or within their family, they're coming out of the closet, and that sparks change. One becomes two, becomes four, becomes eight. If nobody ever sees you, if every gay person was in the closet, do you ever think we would have achieved the rise we have so far? It would never have happened. And then on the other side of it is on a personal level, in an individual conversation. And I've personally done this myself. I was in a cab and there was a Muslim cabbie and we were talking about things. And at that point, I don't see the point of necessarily coming out and talking about atheism, but you can engage with them in the context they're in. That's a minor 10-minute conversation, sure. But on a broader scale, if you don't come out, things can't change. If you don't talk about being an atheist and why it matters that you speak about where you are, who you are, why you disagree with other people, things will never really change.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we started the Council of Ex-Muslims in 2007, the Guardian journalist said, well, what are you talking about? They're not ex-Muslims. You're just trying to provoke people and upset people unnecessarily. And obviously, we see a tsunami of atheism and ex-Muslims across the globe. This is something. There's data. There's a lot of Islamic states are talking about. The Iranian regime, for example, talks about a tsunami of atheism. You have the Saudi government equating atheism with terrorism. The Egyptian government, you name it. And so the fact of the matter is, separate from Muslims, do ex-Muslims also not have a right to exist, have a right not to speak, and to engage? And for believers to recognize that this is just as much a right. Freedom from religion is just as much a right as freedom of religion.
You can't have one without the other.
Thank you. And okay, so two more questions, just so I can cram them both in. I'm hoping you can keep your responses a little short, just so we can give people a chance to get some answers from both of you. So the first question, this one is just for you, Maryam. Why do you think so many Western feminists are silent about the oppression women face in the Muslim world?
Do you want to ask both the questions now, since we don't have much time?
Oh, sure. So the first question is, why, for you, Maryam, why do you think so many Western feminists are silent about the oppression women face in the Muslim world? And the second question, I think, is for both of you, from Chance Goldstein. Moderates in any religion, I think, are the biggest enablers. Do you find that to be the case with Muslims as it is in Christianity?
I'll answer the second question, and then Maryam can answer both of them. So yeah, I agree entirely. So there's a difference between a moderate speaking about what their beliefs are and how they live their lives, versus them presuming that encompasses everything. And often moderates use their identity to silence all opposition, all criticism. Islam does not say this. Instead of, I reject the bad parts of Islam and I am adhering to the good parts of Islam. You'll never see a modern Muslim say that, yes, Islam talks about child rape and that's okay in Islam, but I reject that. No, they'll deny the entire thing. They'll try to whitewash what it is.
Yeah, I was just trying to find a quote from Martin Luther King. I can't find it right now, but it would be great if you did a search if you haven't heard it. But he does talk about being so disappointed in the white moderate and how they enable. I don't know, Muhammad, if you can find it. It's really a great quote, and I think it's so relevant to a lot of the the arguments that we have with those who are supposedly moderate, but they don't really take a stand on fundamental issues that are important also for Muslims and believers, because a lot of believers also face accusations of, for example, apostasy or blasphemy or silencing because they question, because they dissent, they face shunning, which so these are things that I think are applicable to all. And if there is freedom of expression for ex-Muslims, it definitely helps those within the Muslim community who also want to dissent and question. I mean, on Western feminists, again, I think it is this there are many feminists who support women in countries under Islamic rule. I work with many of them, including Western feminists. Again, I think this is very much, this sort of right-wing propaganda to a large extent on how, no one cares about Muslim women except for people like Tommy Robinson. I'm not, of course, saying you're saying that, the person who questioned it, but generally that's the narrative. It's Donald Trump and Tommy Robinson really care about women in Muslim communities, and that's not true. There are lots of feminists working, of course, in the same way that you have a large section of the left, and I'm on the left myself, that support and stand with Islamists even as a way of protecting the Muslim community from racism. You have feminists who do the same. I mean, the example of my being barred from one of the universities in Britain, the Islamic Society had me barred, and they were supported by the Feminist Society and the LGBTQ plus society. So, you've got that happening for sure, because of this misguided idea that if you stop criticism of Islam, you're actually stopping racism, and that is racism in and of itself. So I think we need to keep encouraging people to speak out for people and women everywhere, and that means criticizing religion. I mean, a lot of the fight for women's rights in the West was as a challenge to Christianity. I mean, you've got Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was one of the suffragettes, who said that the biggest obstacle to women's emancipation is the Bible and is the church. And we say the same about the Quran and the Hadith and the Islamic jurisprudence as well. We've done a woman's Quran actually at CMB, which is blank because there's nothing good for women in the Quran. And I think someone found the quote from Martin Luther King, where he said,
"Yeah, Muhammed found it."
Do
you want to read it out loud?
Oh, should I? Sorry,
I can read it if you want. But yeah, I found it as well.
I must confess that over the past few years, I've been greatly disappointed in the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen or the KKK, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice. And it carries on. So.
Okay, I think we're now at the end of this amazing live special, and just to cap things off, Maryam and Muhammad, I hope you can just stay on. Oh, do you want to say something, Muhammad?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the previous conversation with Zara K. One of the questions that was asked about women's rights and the Islamic world back in the day. So that question comes up again and again, and the whole premise of it is untrue and flawed and deliberately biased to begin with. The idea that women's rights were granted is in the context of only one little town in Arabia out of a entire world. Say you grant the premise that Makkah was really bad and terrible and whatever, that does not say anything about Somalia or England back then or Indonesia or whatever else. It was one tiny little town. And the entire world is much more diverse than that. And you can see that just by comparing Makkah and Medina. In Medina, women had far more rights. When the Meccans moved to Medina, there was a lot of conflicts because the Meccan women started talking back to their husbands, and they complained to Muhammad and Umar, and that's where the wife-beating stuff came in to silence that temerity of Meccan women to talk back to their husbands. And then even if you put that piece aside, you have Khadija. Khadija is such a huge example of a non-Muslim woman that was independent and powerful and all of these other things that we talk about prior to Islam even existing. So in what world are you saying that they made it better when their own examples and their own religious texts say the opposite?
Thank you so much for that, Muhammad. And yeah, so everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm gonna just add everyone who's still there in our who contributed to our previous panels just to say hello. So Zara, adding you. Zara has an extra bonus guest. Haram Doodles is also here. Veedu, I think, is back. Hey, Veedu, welcome back. And we also want to give a shout out to Veiled Rose, who helped moderate everything so smoothly. Thank you so much for all your support, Veiled Rose. Yeah, so thank you everyone for tuning in. This was really incredible. I wanted to quickly mention the results of the poll question in the live chat. So is Ramadan a positive force in the world? So the consensus is no. 69% say no. 23% said maybe, it depends, and 9% said yes. And yeah, so I just wanted to say as well that like these kinds of spaces are so important. I think, you know, whoever's watching, I hope you can be encouraged to know that you're not alone during Ramadan or the rest of the year. And as Suman Koke says so well, ex-Muslim influencers' work is so important because it's making it easier for people to transition from Muslims to ex-Muslims, and will undoubtedly remove a huge amount of trauma when leaving. And unfortunately, it's the case that trauma is unavoidable for a lot of us just because of the nature of how Islam works, how dogmas work. And yeah, so I just want to leave it to all of you if you want to just say anything, if you want to just have any last words.
It's wonderful.
Feel free to do
here
so
and see
now.
everybody. It's been a long time.
It's definitely been a long time. Thank you so much for organizing this and having us all on.
Oh, no, that was awesome. Yeah. And yeah, just a reminder to everyone as well, you can also tune into this if you want to share it as well on the XMNA website. The video link is in the description below, so you can click there if you want to subscribe there as well. XMNA does a lot of work for a lot of ex-Muslims, and yeah, that's just great again.
I think we should also do a little plug-in for Ex-Muslims International, which
Of course.
has brought us all together again, which is great because that's something that had started a while back, and it had kind of fallen on the wayside. And then at the Celebrating Dissent in Oslo, we all got together, and it's been revamped. It's got a great new website. We've been doing work together, and this is one of the first projects more recently that we're all doing together. And hopefully we can carry on this joint work because it's so important for us. There's strength in numbers, and it just makes me so happy to see your faces. So we need to do a lot more of this. And thank you especially to Veedu, Secular Spirit, and Veiled Rose for just organizing all of this today.
But yeah, okay, everyone, I'll let you all go. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday wherever you are in the world. Ramadan is almost over.
Yay.
But the challenges of an ex-Muslim unfortunately never stop though. So yeah, take care everyone, and hopefully we can do another video like this very, very soon.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
A little love sign.